spooky and ASMR. Hello, my spooky friends, and welcome back, or welcome to my channel. I am so happy to see you today, as today I have another true crime ASMR video for you to enjoy. I apologize for so many voiceovers lately. I just wanted to be able to sit here in my PJs and tell you about this case that was recommended by one of you. Today, we will be diving in to the case of Ruth Ellis. Ruth Ellis was the last woman executed in Britain at the age of 28. Ruth was hanged on July 13th, 1955, for the murder of her lover, David Blakeley. So that is today's case. I hope you find it relaxing and informative. I will be adding this case to my True Crime ASMR series playlist, and this is where you can find past and future videos in this series. Now let's get into it. Ruth Ellis was born Ruth Neilson in a town in Wales on October 9th, 1926. She was the fifth of 6 children. Her mother, Bertha, was a Belgian refugee, while her father, Arthur Hornby, was a cellist from Manchester. The family moved often and changed surnames often too. Nobody is entirely sure why. Biographers have speculated it was to stop neighbors or schools that were becoming aware of Arthur's abuse. Perhaps it was for Arthur's work, but the fact remains that Ruth's upbringing was blighted by sexual abuse at the hands of her father, beginning when Arthur's twin brother, Charles, was killed in a bicycle accident in 1928. Her father preyed upon her elder sister, Muriel. By the time she was 14, she had conceived a child who was brought up alongside the rest of the family as a brother to Ruth and her siblings. Arthur also abused Ruth, starting from when she was 11, though she would often try to fight back. By 1940, Arthur had moved to London after being offered a job as a live-in caretaker for visited from reading caught Edna and Arthur in bed together. Shortly afterwards, Bertha moved to London, too. A few years later, Ruth found herself pregnant at the age of 17. The father was a married Canadian soldier named Claire Andrea McCallum. And while she kept the baby, whom she called Claire Andrea or Andy, the relationship with his father did not survive, and Ruth found herself working factory jobs to support herself and her son. By the end of the 1940s, the family was all living in London, Ruth moving on from factory work to sex work. She started with nude modeling, and her manager was Morris Conley. Conley was notorious for blackmailing employees into sleeping with him. Ruth would then move on to being a nightclub hostess in Hampstead. By 1950, Ruth was working as an escort. This period of her life was punctuated by several unhappy relationships, often with clients. The main one was George Johnston Ellis. He was a 41-year-old divorced dentist who also happened to be an alcoholic. The pair married on November 8th at a registry office in Kent, but the marriage quickly became violent. George was convinced that Ruth was cheating on him. When their daughter Georgina was born in 1951, he refused to acknowledge her as his own. The pair split up shortly after, forcing Ellis to return to sex work and to move back in to the family home with her children. Despite the horrible circumstances, by 1953, she had started working at the Little Club reconcile their own relationship with seeing other people. Blakeley was still engaged at the time, but continued to have affairs with both men and women, and the relationship with Ruth became violent. This culminated in an incident in January of 1955, where he punched Ruth in the stomach so hard that she miscarried. In a ghostwritten life story published in the Woman's Sunday Mirror, Ruth wrote that she often gave Blakeley money for cigarettes, food, and drinks, and that he would attack her after he had been drinking. He would smack my face and punch me, she wrote, and once lost all control. His fist struck me between the eyes, and I fell to the floor. Savagely, he beat me as I lay there. Nobody knows what Ruth's tipping point was, but on Easter Sunday, April 10th, 1955, she left Cuson's house and arrived at the Magdala, a Hampstead pub where Blakeley was with friends. At 9:30 p.m., Blakeley and his friends, Clive Gunnell, left the pub, and as he arrived at his car, Ruth took a revolver from her handbag and fired at him 5 times. The last 3 into his back as he lay on the floor. According to the pathologist, Blakeley was left with powder burns on his skin from the proximity of the gun. The 6th shot, which Ruth tried to fire at Blakeley, ricocheted off the road and took off the thumb of bystander Gladys Ewell. After the attack, Ruth appeared to be in shock. "I am guilty. I'm a little confused," she was heard saying, adding to Blakeley's friend, "Will you call the police, Clive?" Immediately arrested by an off-duty policeman, she was taken to Hampstead police station and appeared calm. She later gave a full confession. This calm was a source of consternation for the authorities. Ruth was examined by doctors and psychiatrists, neither of whom found any evidence of mental illness. She even underwent an electroencephalograph, which monitors electric signals from the brain. Ruth appeared at the Old Bailey for her trial in June 1955, where she was asked by the prosecutor, Christmas Humphreys, what her motive for shooting Blakeley was. This led to her infamous response, "It's obvious when I shot him, I intended to kill him." From there, her fate was sealed. The jury took less than 20 minutes to return a guilty verdict for a charge of murder, sentencing her to death. When the murder verdict was passed and Ruth sentenced, there was a public which he refused. In conversations that happened the day before her death, Ruth told solicitor Victor Mishkin that her lover, Newson, had given her the gun she used to kill Blakeley, taught her how to use it, and even driven her to the pub after the pair had been drinking together. I didn't say anything about it up to now because it seemed traitorous. Absolutely traitorous, she told him. Despite renewed calls for an 11th hour reprieve, Lloyd George and those at the Home Office remained firm. Now, this combined with the abuse Ruth suffered at the hands of Blakeley would likely have mitigated her sentence to one of manslaughter rather than murder. It would be a bad day for this country if we adopted the doctrine of crime passionnel. The permanent secretary, Sir Frank Newsom, allegedly advised Lloyd George. This was a deliberately planned and cold-bloodedly executed murder. Ruth was hanged in Holloway Prison on July 13th by Albert Pierrepoint and buried in an unmarked grave on the grounds of the prison, though she would be reburied later in Amersham. In her last letter to Blakeley's parents, she told them that, "I have always loved your son, and I shall die still loving him." In an interview with The Guardian, her sister, Muriel, said, "She was very calm. My mom said, 'Don't ask any questions and let Ruth do the talking.' I just had a new baby, and she said, 'What was he like?' And she said she liked the dress I had on. I believe she thought that at the last minute they'd say, 'You'll go to prison instead.'" Ruth's death had a profound effect on the way the British public and the rest of the world saw the death penalty. The decision to execute her was attacked by newspapers and columnists, including the novelist Raymond Chandler, who wrote a letter to the Evening Standard condemning the medieval savagery of the law. The death penalty itself was halted in 1965, while the last execution occurred in 1964. By that point, however, reprieves were common. Around half of those sentenced to death had their sentences commuted. And despite potentially providing Ruth with the means and motive to kill, no action was ever taken regarding Desmond Newson. He continues denying giving Ruth the gun and later moved to Australia. Ruth's family suffered terribly as a result of her death. Her ex-husband, George, took his own life, hanging himself in a hotel in 1958. Ruth's mother, Bertha, was discovered feel so bad for everyone involved. I think Ruth was, she should never have died for this crime. I think Desmond Newson is the one that should have been held responsible. I think Ruth's sentence should have been lessened. It is terrible that Blakeley was murdered. I am not saying that that is not terrible, but in my mind, Ruth was coerced to commit this crime. Newson not only supplied the weapon, but he brought her there, and you can't tell me he was happy with sharing Ruth. She was beautiful. And to share her with Blakeley, who is also a womanizer and out and about, you can't tell me Newson was not behind this. Ruth was fine being polyamorous, and Ruth moved in with him with 2 children, and the way this man got out scot-free while this woman was held accountable, and she protected him. I think she knew that it wasn't even worth it for her at that point. And I think she felt immense guilt after she had